Morning, YouTube. Got a story for you coming out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I'm intentionally talking about this because it seems when pushing certain narratives, we're under the misconception of what is. You hear me? And I'm going to keep saying this over and over repeatedly that depending on the demographics, it allows one to experience what they experience, to then proceed to other demographics and share those experiences, whether they're good or bad. Now, in 2020, the elevated height of discussion was based around what? Police brutality, unjust killings by law enforcement, and who it has affected. Okay? We all experienced the Black Lives Matter movement, whatever. You already know what my thoughts are about that. Alright? When I say things, 9 times out of 10, I'm not being condescending. I'm actually being genuine. Especially when I say, I hear you. Okay? Now, moving along, I came across a story entertaining the YouTube rabbit hole algorithm coming from the Real News Network, right? And this story touched base upon a young female, 19 years of age, who was driving. For some reason, got into a confrontation with the police, I guess through a routine traffic or whatever. I'm not clear on the details, so don't quote me. But and it told her fleeing, taking the cops on a high-speed chase or whatever, and eventually the vehicle came to a stop. The young woman got out and fled and hid behind the bushes. Now, upon that happening, there was a K-9 unit. Now, I'm sure people who watch cops and other law enforcement shows that are on TV, you generally get to see how K-9s are handled. Mostly when they're doing like searches of a vehicle for drugs or whatever. Well, in this particular case and incident, this K-9, instead of going to the bush where this young woman was at and standing its ground, alerting the officer as to where the suspect was, it took it upon itself to attack the girl. It didn't, and the K-9 didn't, how should I say, it didn't do what it was supposed to do to, what's the word, apprehend or prevent the suspect from fleeing. You know, yeah, the term I was looking for was restrain and apprehend. Instead, the K-9 attacked, and upon attacking, the K-9 didn't go for the arm, didn't go for the leg, didn't go for the shirt, and went straight for the girl's face, tearing her ear, cracking some of the bones in her face, ruptured her nose, her eye, her lip. The picture on my thumbnail is the picture of what's the girl's name? Damn. Trinity and Fleming. That's her name, Trinity and Fleming. Well, of course, giving the testimonial of her mom, Jennifer Fleming, she expressed that she didn't do so well in life. She got into some trouble, which led to her daughter going from foster to foster home. And I can sympathize with that because I understand when you have a broken home, it creates broken people, and children are the ones that are most affected by it. And they deal and cope with things the best that they can. Sometimes the coping mechanisms aren't what society approve of, but nonetheless, it's available for them to access. Think about that shit. Now, it's unfortunate, but I give this mother credit. It's unfortunate that she walked on the wrong side of life, but because she did, she learned a lot about the law. She was very articulate. I'm telling people right now, go to the Real News Network. It covers the story in detail. But I'm just giving my secondhand feedback on what I was observing. She says her child was mildly troublesome, but she's a good person. You know? And what led up to those events didn't justify the dog and the officer being judge, jury, executioner, because the dog was utilized as a deadly weapon. And to the mother's testimony, from what her daughter told her, that the officer, when the dog was already in midst of attacking her face and stuff, the officer was given further commands to attack her while she was already being attacked. This is a woman. This is a young girl, 19 years of age. Really? She's that much of a threat? And she's hiding in the bushes. Okay? So, this young girl's hiding in the bushes. She's being attacked. She's being mauled. She's being disfigured. Mutilated. She ends up going to the hospital. Her mom said that there was an officer sitting in the room with her, asking her a bunch of questions, and assured her that there were no charges being filed against her, at the time, whatever. But, of course, you already know the procedure of law enforcement. When they know that they done fucked up, they gotta find anything to justify why an incident took place to get them out of the hot seat and excuse the actions of either them or the assistance of the K-9. Okay? Now, her mom said that they violated her 8th Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and subjected her to cruel and unusual punishment. And I agree. I agree. That shit was uncalled for. But people say, why are you talking about this particular incident? I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. And this is where I talk about balancing the scales, because where people conveniently act upon being dismissive, I don't. I acknowledge. And when I acknowledge, I share. Okay? And I'm sharing this to make a point. Black people are always talking about how they are always, or seemingly to be, the only ones affected by the cruelty of law enforcement. And in their mind, everyone else is exempt. Only black people go through this bullshit. I try to say in other arguments that is not true, because there are other examples of where law enforcement be fucking white people off as well. But I get ignored. They deflect. Okay? And I know I probably get some criticism as to why I don't cover as much examples and incidences related to shit that affect the black community, but I do touch upon it. But I not only am going to touch upon the wrongs that are done in the black community and what affects the black community, but I'm also going to point out the shit that white people go through, because we seem to be under the misguided impression that because there are two different worlds, that some of the problems that people experience fall only into one group's lap and not the other. And that's a misconception. That's a false misconception. Okay? Now, people talk about the rhetoric that they throw in the face of black people when they deal with law enforcement, and the rhetoric and the kickback that they get from that. Think that don't apply to white people? In this particular case with Trinity and Fleming, they said that they found no drugs in the car, but they found paraphernalia. The paraphernalia that they found was needles. That was it. Well, conclusions could be drawn and jumped to justify whatever, but really, it holds no weight, really, because you can't prove otherwise beyond assuming such. Case in point, somebody pulled my mom over, they can say, well, this woman got needles in her pocketbook. But they won't tell you that she got insulin because my mom is diabetic. And my mom had a diabetic episode, which she has, and she was frozen because the sugar fucked with her. What had happened to my mom 15 years ago happened today. Kosh probably would have acted with the attitude of probably shooting at my mom's vehicle, killing her while she was having a diabetic episode. Stuck at a traffic light. Couldn't move. I witnessed her sugar crashing myself on a different occasion. And I had to give her some sweets, orange or something like that, to help balance it out. And I had to call the ambulance and stuff like that. But I'm saying, and now they're trying to file charges because they understand the magnitude in which and the attention that now this particular situation has attracted. So now, why does it seem like it's always routine out of convenience when law enforcement done fucked up? They always try to demonize the victim. She fled from you. She hid in the bush. That did not justify what happened to her. And that K-9 was that officer's responsibility. And they handled that K-9 with use of deadly force. Not to restrain, not to apprehend, but to kill on command. And it's unfortunate. Very unfortunate. But you know, there will always be excuses made for why law enforcement get away with what they get away with. And then they paint the suspect, the victim, as the villain to give credibility towards their actions. And I'm trying to tell people, it's not just a black issue. This shit goes on and happens in the white community as well. And you'll hear, because I'm sure they're going to try and drag the history of the mother's past through the mud. They're going to sit there and talk about this girl's behavior, but it's no excuse. And like I said before, there's a due process. If the girl is guilty of something, she has a right to due process. But it seems like we're skipping over the due process and just taking shit into our own account, especially if you're law enforcement. And it's funny because while people are sitting there, and I'm gonna point this out, and I'm gonna just hit the nail on the head with this. And you can be pissed off if you're an OTL that just has to be the ones to rally and root behind law enforcement. You have stories that come out about police who beat the shit out their wives, abuse their authority and their position of power, caught up in drugs and shit like that. Whether they're using it or planting it as evidence against somebody else that they target and go after just to justify a false arrest. Okay? How they steal money that they take off of people when they arrest them. You think all that money goes into the evidence room? No, the fuck it doesn't. And if you're that naive to believe that shit, then you're just a lost cause. Trust me. Policing for profit. And for some time they use that whole situation with the drugs. If you travel with a certain amount of money, and people who own businesses, they don't believe in banks and stuff, especially if they're going to go purchase a car or if they're going to go invest in another property or a franchise and stuff. They don't got time to be dealing with pirate police. And then you have to go through unnecessary court process to get what's rightfully yours. How do you set up a system where you could legally justify stealing from people? But people don't focus on that shit. And then when it comes to police violating your physical well-being, and then they try to tell you that you don't have a right to self-preservation, but yeah, you're supposed to sit there and be sympathetic to what they go through. But then there's people who overlook what they put people through. How can you be sympathetic to what an officer goes through and excuse and ignore what they put people through and be okay with it? And like I tell people that sit there and rally behind certain law enforcement, because I'm saying this, it's not every officer, but for those that need to be pointed out and have the spotlight shine on, those are the ones that are dangerous because they can affect many people's lives, whether it's their freedom or their physical well-being. And it's unfortunate for this girl that she had to go through what she had to go through without due process. Color doesn't matter in this particular narrative. It does not. Because the way the authority has been acting is with total disregard. They don't care about your rights. They don't care about due process. All they care about is what suits them. But when things come full circle and shit start coming and biting them in the ass, then they want to be looked at as being humanized and people supposed to empathize with them. But where was that empathy when it came to them dealing with other people? There was none. There was no restrictions or regards to de-escalation. But like I always say, I preach balancing the scales. This was a young white girl who got viciously attacked by a K-9 under an officer's command. And the outcome is she has to have reconstructive surgery on her face. Shit's uncalled for. And it's utterly ridiculous. But that's all I got time for. Until next time. Until next video. And please stay safe. Be well. Okay?